Welcome back, friends and warriors, to another episode of Power Over Pink. I am your host and breast cancer survivor, Tara Kamm. And on my channel, I highlight warrior stories of people who have faced breast cancer and or are facing breast cancer to let them tell their stories, to help be their own advocates and get their voice out there, but also to inspire hope and encourage others facing the battle themselves, and to kind of give you an idea of what the battle might look like for you. But every story is different, and whatever we mention here, it is not medical advice. Always, of course, seek that from your doctors, but it's just educational purposes only. So today I have a beautiful guest with me that I met at the Young Survivor Coalition in Atlanta. I'm so glad that you stopped by my booth. So welcome to my channel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Kim was so sweet when she stopped by and introduced herself, and I was so thrilled that you signed up to tell us your whole story. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, a little about you.
Yeah. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, grew up here, and then moved to Michigan, met my now husband, and about almost 10 years now, we moved back to the D.C. area. My parents were living here at that time, and then got married in 2017. We've been together since. We have a now dog of 4 years old. And it's just us and our dog. He is our fur baby. And I work for a head of HR for a cybersecurity company. Love what I do and just enjoying life here as, a survivor.
Yeah, I actually just found out about a big convention for breast cancer coming to the DC area in August. It's
I heard about that.
CancerCon.
CancerCon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have
I
you ever
heard about
gone
that
to it?
too. No, not at all. Honestly, last year was the first year of just discovering breast cancer conferences, events. So I was introduced to a whole world of the breast cancer community. And it's at first it was quite overwhelming, but now I'm discovering new events, new retreats, new resources, and I'm loving every single one. I think this year I'm trying to, I'll probably try to go to the Cancer Con and
Yeah.
yeah, go to other events.
Yeah, there's so much out there. There's community to be found. So anyway, I was thinking I might
Exactly.
come. So if I do come, I'll maybe say hi.
Please do. Please do. Yeah.
Well, so tell us about your breast cancer journey. How did it begin?
Yeah. So I turned 40 in 2022. Wait, I'm 43 now. So when I turned 40, my primary care physician, whom I love, I always tell her she saved my life because she made me get a mammogram. But when I turned 40, that's when she introduced the idea of, writing me prescription to get a mammogram. I was a bad patient, I guess, and I didn't go that year. I had no family history. I didn't know anyone that had breast cancer or cancer even. And I was definitely of the mentality of that would never happen to me. And I think this is quite common. Just
Hmm.
that idea of
Yeah.
cancer would never happen to me. I'm a healthy, active, young 40-year-old.
Yeah.
I never dreamed that cancer would be a part of my world. So I didn't go. And I typically am a very good student. And, if a doctor tells me what to do, I do it. Uh, but so the next year when I turned 41, I went back to my annual checkup and she asked me if I did my mammogram last year. And I told her no, but I promised her I would do it this year. And when I went, I think a week later, that's when they discovered a lump. And I quickly then had a diagnostic mammogram and like a biopsy. And then at the biopsy, honestly, and I hear also this is pretty common. I knew then because the doctors and the nurses they just had that look on their faces, and so I left that building, telling my husband as we were walking to the car that there's definitely something. So that's what I knew. And then shortly after, I think a few days later, I got the call, and it was stage 2 breast cancer, and they determined that because it was a 2.5 centimeter tumor. And then I primary care physician actually recommended the breast surgeon that I have now. And so I saw him about a week later, and then everything just kind of happened really quickly after that. Yeah, so I went to him, and the very first plan was to extract the tumor, have a lumpectomy. And I left that meeting, the very first meeting, thinking that this is going to be easy peasy. It would just be a lumpectomy and radiation. And I was just very hopeful that this was going to be a couple months of treatment and it wouldn't be as, invasive. It'd just be yeah, again, a lumpectomy and radiation. That turned into another surgery. I had to get extended margins because they couldn't clear the margins during the lumpectomy. Fortunately, though, they took out 2 lymph nodes. It wasn't in the lymph nodes, so it
Yeah,
didn't
that's good
spread.
news. Yeah.
Um, and then I had the second surgery to extend my margins. They still couldn't clear the margins at that point. But I also took a mammoprint test. And that's kind of
Mammogram.
similar. Yeah, it's kind of similar to an oncotype test where they test for your risk of recurrence.
Mm-hmm.
And it came out as luminal B, high risk. So I have a high risk of recurrence. And because of that, even though it didn't spread to my lymph nodes, I still was recommended to go the chemotherapy route. So I had 4 rounds of taxotere and Cytoxan.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably the one and only time during active treatment that I actually cried when I got the call to say that I had to go through chemotherapy. They got the results of the mammoprint, and that was devastating. More, honestly, more than the diagnosis itself. You go through the emotions of you got cancer. It's kind of shocking. So for a couple of weeks, everything was very surreal. I was shocked. And then when you have the first meeting with your breast cancer surgeon, and I loved him. Like I love him. He's a great surgeon. He also gave me a lot of hope that it was just going to be a lumpectomy and radiation.
Yeah.
And then to hear that you would have to go through chemo uh, with a chemo drug that will give 100% hair loss. That is, as what's the word? As shallow as that may seem, I think every woman wants to keep their hair
Yeah.
if they had their choice. So yeah, so for me that was the most devastating part. And so fortunately, though, I was fortunate enough that my cancer center provided cold capping,
Good.
and that was just another experience that I was just so thankful for. One, for medical advancement, that
Mm-hmm.
we had that technology to be able to save my hair, and then two, that I could afford it. Insurance doesn't cover it. And so I was just very, very fortunate and understand just how privileged I am to be able to afford that. And so with cold capping, I saved about, I'd say 40 to 50% of my hair. And then after chemo, they recommended for breast preservation that I have another extended margins, and they were pretty certain that they would be able to get all of the cancer cells this last third surgery. But after talking and after reviewing, my case, after talking to my friends who are oncologists and doctors, I decided I just wanted to get a bilateral mastectomy.
Yeah.
I was young enough and I just didn't want to come back, 10, 20, 30 years later when I'm older and having to go through another surgery if I needed to. And so I just wanted to do it now. And I chose bilateral just to be symmetrical.
Yeah.
So I decided on a bilateral mastectomy, and then fortunately, also I was a good candidate for skin sparing deep flap reconstruction, and I also was a good candidate for nerve grafting, which I think is called resensation.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that all in one surgery. So I had the double mastectomy, also the deep flap reconstruction with resensation and skin spare, yeah. So
Wow.
that was honestly the largest surgery. I think it took about 6 hours altogether. I stayed in the hospital for about 3 days, and the recovery for that was hell.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can imagine.
At that point, before the surgery, I thought, man, chemo was definitely the hardest thing I've ever gone through. But I can tell you, I think the recovery from the D flap reconstruction, that they basically take out all of your fat tissue from your stomach area and then pull the skin back together, but sew you up so tightly that for about 3 months I was hunched over and I couldn't stand straight because my skin wasn't, they closed me up so tightly. And so that was really hard, on top of the drains and on top of, all the care that you need for your mastectomy. I also really couldn't walk. I couldn't move a whole lot, and it was just a tough recovery. But that was in, I'm sorry, I just realized I didn't say the date. So I was diagnosed in mid 2023, and all of the treatment happened at the second half of 2023. So from June all the way to December. I had the surgery at the end of December of 2023. And so the beginning half of last year was just recovery from the major surgery. But on January 3rd last year, that's when I got the call after the surgery that they got the results of the double mastectomy, and I was NED,
Nice.
no
That's a good
evidence of
feeling.
disease. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was a day that I definitely celebrated. But yeah, after that, the rest of 2024 was a was just uncharted territory, and I learned so much about what life after cancer was or is. And it was just so different than what I imagined it to be. You think about when you get a diagnosis, that's like the hardest news to ever hear. And active treatment, people can only imagine that that's probably the worst thing that, a person would have to go through with cancer. After you get the, cancer free or NED news, it's also really hard because I feel like last year was the hardest year emotionally for me. I think during active treatment, that was the hardest physically, but the year after was definitely the hardest emotionally because you're balancing the emotion of like, you should be celebrating and you are so happy, that you're NED, but at the same time, you are grieving immensely for everything that cancer took away. And was the hardest journey and lesson to learn last year, that I lost so much and I needed to allow myself to properly grieve all that happened. And so that took about the rest of the year. So all of last year was just my grieving year, and it's okay. I can say now that it's okay that I grieved all last year. And I think this year I'm learn what my life after cancer is looking like now.
How has it changed? How would you say with your outlook on life and
Yeah. Honestly, this whole, I guess, cancer journey, completely changed my perspective. I think it will always change everyone's perspective, once they get a cancer diagnosis. But for me, I think number one, obviously, your life just looks different, and you are so grateful for every day that you're alive. I think when you enter into the cancer community, you start having like survivor's guilt because you know other cancer sisters who haven't made it. Um, and so I think from that perspective, like my gratitude of life has changed. But now I'm finally in a place where, how do I put this? I'm finding joy back in my life now.
yeah.
And that's just such a good feeling. I have more energy and I'm now ready to embrace more joy in my life and finding what that looks like. It may not look like the joy that I had pre-diagnosis, but now I am finding joy in other things. And I think at the end of the day, it's just about having joy and finding that joy.
Yeah. I think that you worded it beautifully, how you talked about the grieving process. I think
Mm.
that more survivors need to be, I guess, willing to share on that. It looks different for everyone. It sounds like our treatments and our protocol was the same, and then they got clear margins on my lumpectomy, so I did not have to do the mastectomy.
Yeah.
But sometimes I wonder, should I have done that? Because, the fear of reoccurrence, all these things kind of creep in. And, always kind of being in the community of breast cancer and on the channel, hearing stories, I have to be careful with my own mindset. But, we recently started a support group here locally for Young Survivor Coalition for Northwest Florida. And one of the things we talked about, and this is going to sound really morbid, but we talked about having a funeral
Mhm.
because I feel like your old self kind of dies and
Yeah.
then you don't have a chance to grieve the loss because you're so in fight or flight and like you're in this warrior like mindset, like you're fighting, and then cancer ends, and then you're like, oh, and you're completely changed, and you're like, but who is this new person in this new body? And
Mhm.
you don't necessarily like this new person, and the steroids make you fluffy, and your hair is falling out, and you feel ugly, and
Jeez.
then your
Yes.
breasts are changed, but you're a warrior and you're strong, but
Yeah.
you're like, but I didn't sign up for that battle. So it's just this weird mental. A lot of survivors I've interviewed have talked about, depression that happens after the battle.
Such conflicting
It
emotions.
is so hard to process that. So I love that you said give yourself time to grieve because yeah, because it's real.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't realize that until earlier in the beginning of this year. I go to an oncology therapist, which that was a game changer to go to an oncotherapist. But she, in the beginning of this year, I told her I think I'm ready to have a little bit of joy back in my life, and she gave me this analogy that I think is kind of common about grief, and it resonated so well with me. And she said that, grief is like a big ball and it's inside a mason jar, and you are the mason jar. And grief actually doesn't get smaller as time goes on, it stays the same. But instead, the mason jar yourself gets larger and larger as time goes on. And it just means that grief will always be the same. Grief will always be there, but your capacity to have more than just grief, to have joy, to have other things in your life grows and expands as time goes on. And that just resonated so well with me. It hit home. And I just realized that all of last year, it helped me feel validated that all of last year, I had no room for anything else but grief. Like that was the only emotion that I could feel all of last year. And even though I didn't recognize it, that's what I was going through. And then now that I feel my mason jar growing bigger, I'm realizing that's why it prompted me to ask my oncotherapist or tell my oncotherapist that I think I'm ready to find joy back in my life. And she's like, your mason jar is growing, you're allowing more things in your life other than grief because you have more room now. And
Yeah.
I love that.
And you're continuing to heal and grow and blossom from this new thing that you've overcome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
exactly.
That's
Yeah.
very helpful. And yeah, I actually went to an oncotherapist myself last year just to kind of help me with the constant fear of reoccurrence, always kind of in the back of my mind. But I do think that a lot of that fear of reoccurrence is more of the survivor guilt.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
don't, you touched on that just a little bit too. So, I've lost a couple friends already just doing the channel, and I've met some incredible ladies. And then I know a few metastatic women who are, still fighting. And, so it's like this roller coaster of thoughts all the time.
Yeah.
So talk
Yeah.
to me a little bit about what you experienced with that.
I talked to my husband a lot about, my journey, and he's just been incredible throughout my experience. Uh, I was telling him that the fear of recurrence, even though, doctors will give you statistics, every time you get like your new hormone therapy drug or, a new treatment comes out, they'll give you all of these statistics. And no matter how small it is, there's always going to be a looming fear. And even if from an outsider's perspective, it may be irrational, you just, you haven't gone through cancer. And, and I don't know how to put it in a nice way to him, but I was just telling him, like it's, um, I'm sorry to say, but because I've gone through cancer, because we've gone through cancer, you don't know what it feels like to have the fear that it'll come back. And also when you enter into the community of cancer survivors or cancer thrivers or just cancer in general, and you see so many other people, or you meet so many other people, you're bound to meet people who aren't able to survive it. And it just reinforces that fear. So, I think at this point, I definitely just accept that I'll always have that fear. And it helps me to know that I am doing everything I can to prevent that risk or to lower that risk. I go through, I'm doing endocrine therapy because my cancer was hormone positive, and luckily, unfortunately, my side effects are all manageable, so it's not too bad. But I'm trying to look at it from the perspective that I had while I was going through active treatment, and that was just take it one day at a time. So with the fear of, like, if it's if I have like a moment where I'm just really afraid of that, recurrence, I will allow myself to feel and then move past, take it as it comes and then move past. Like, so then I'm just focusing on the present, basically.
Yeah. And I think honestly too, I think people live in fear about a lot of things
Yeah.
that haven't had cancer or a realistic, battle. And so I think just capturing that and just not dwelling in it, I think a lot of people have to overcome those thoughts on a daily basis too. But it's a challenge though. But I think also on the flip side of that, it's positive because when, like you said, when you have those moments and those thoughts, like give it some space and then move past it. But then it almost makes you be like, well, you know what? Time is short.
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah.
live. Let me live. Like I want to live while I'm here, and that life is a little sweeter. Birthdays are a little more special. Anniversaries are more special. Friendships are more deepened. Like
Yes.
all the things. So
Yeah. Oh man, the amount of times that my husband and I, after post diagnosis, that we've said, this doesn't matter anymore. We've said that so many times where we'll just be talking and then we realize, like, we might be like venting or complaining about something, and then we're like, but that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, like, that's such a small thing. It doesn't matter. And it just has changed our perspective that the little things don't matter anymore. And it really is about enjoying life, investing in relationships, in people, and you know, that's all that's gonna matter at the end of your life.
100%. How did you live
Yeah.
while you were here?
Yeah, exactly. And I do wanna touch on like, celebrate life.
Hmm.
I think that was another thing that kinda helped me throughout even throughout active treatment was, my oncotherapist was saying, like, "Just celebrate every little thing." And that actually really helped while I was going through chemo or the surgeries or recovery, just celebrating every little thing. And then even now, like, I had my cancerversary in January, and I try to, you know, threw a big party, but celebrating the day that I got the cancer-free news. And yeah, I love that, and I would totally encourage other cancer patients just to celebrate everything, because why not? Like, this is an excuse to celebrate you, to celebrate every little thing that you went through,
Yeah.
and I think it's a good excuse.
It is. It's a fantastic excuse, even like just to be healthy in the moment, when you're healthy, celebrate that. I have my husband and I joined a gym, and at the end of one of the classes, this one coach always says, she says, be thankful. It's a privilege to move your body the way you just did. And so the whole class, it doesn't mean anything to anybody else in that room, I don't think. But every time she says it, I'm like, yes, it
Yeah,
is such a privilege because there's no way I could have done this 3 years ago. So it's a privilege to be able to go to exercise class. It's
yeah,
something to celebrate. And yeah, life is worth
yeah,
celebrating.
yeah. I think there was a huge change in my husband and my conversations that we had, pre-diagnosis versus post. And now I would say it's just like over 50%. Like the majority of our conversations are always about like what we're grateful for.
Yeah.
And I love, I think we were reflecting back on that, and it all kind of started after my diagnosis, that we talk a lot about what we're grateful for, and it helps us to see things more positively, and it helps
Yeah.
us to be more grateful and appreciative of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I can't help but think about your job in HR and how a lot of times people bicker and complain about things that don't really matter.
Oh my
Has it
goodness.
changed to the way you like intercede and like, hey,
No. So I also understand, everyone's going through something, and I really went into this field because I didn't I want our employees to know that they're not judged. And that's just kind of how I approach life in general. I just don't want anyone to feel judged. And I want them to feel seen and heard. And so, um, you know, absolutely. Just between, like between us and the cancer community, absolutely. I want to say, like, you do not know what you have.
how lucky you are.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Every time someone complains about, something.
Yeah. I find that at my own work and I'm not in HR. The little team will be bickering about something and I'm like, just stop.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, and there was a time and place, or there wasn't a time and place. There were times, definitely, especially after my diagnosis, like shortly after a diagnosis, where I just had I could hold no space for complaints.
Hmm.
And I think now I'm in a better space and headspace to be able to allow that and look past that, and hear someone. But I would say about a year into my, treatments and cancer journey, I didn't even want to hear it. I definitely felt that way.
I love the honesty. Yes.
Yeah.
You're like, knock it
Yeah.
off. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
really, though.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I don't think you said your full diagnosis. So was it
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
invasive ductal carcinoma?
Yeah. It was. Yeah. Stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma, HR positive, HER2 negative. And I think because of the mammoprint, it was luminal B, high risk.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you remember what your onco score type was, or do you remember your grade, tumor grade?
Yeah. Yeah. So grade 3.
Hmm.
The tumor was grade 3, and I didn't take an oncotype. My breast surgeon recommended the mammoprint, which is very similar, he
Yeah.
said.
Okay. I have not heard of that, so maybe in the South
Okay, yeah.
we're not that advanced yet.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I honestly haven't heard. I learned so much more from Facebook groups,
Hmm.
from the cancer community, from the breast cancer conferences and retreats, and my other cancer sisters than I did with my doctors, even though I love them. Like, I love them. They did amazing work, but just informationally, I learned so much more from the community than I did with my doctors.
Yeah, I agree.
I and I am thankful though that right now I'm taking Signatera testing, which is
Hmm.
the circulating tumor DNA test.
Okay.
And I just actually had the blood draw yesterday. So a phlebotomist comes to my house and draws my blood, and then they compare with my previous tumor to see if there are any matching cancer cells in my body. And then I get the results, and it's for the past year it's been negative.
Nice.
But they do it every 3 months. So I'm really thankful that I have that opportunity.
Yeah. That's I just had someone else tell me about that. Actually, my oncologist, I switched oncologist and he was like, "Have you not done this?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Well, insurance doesn't cover it, but here's some,
Yeah,
costs so you can
yeah.
put some money aside if you want to do it." So I was kind of thinking about doing that myself because mine diagnosis was the same.
Okay, Tara, don't quote me on this and ask, but I'm almost positive that right now, even though my insurance doesn't cover it either,
Hmm.
and I think if you want to pay it out of pocket, I think the insurance like quoted like 5,000
Yeah.
per test. Signatera, or the company, Natera, they won't charge. They will never bill you. The doctor's office will order it and will try to apply your insurance to it.
Hmm.
And then typically what happens is my insurance denies it,
Yeah.
but then I never receive the bill. I never
Really?
receive, like Natera, and I've talked to them over the phone, and Natera says that we won't bill because they're still at a stage of collecting data. So
That's
yeah,
super
I hope
great
that's helpful. Yeah.
information.
Yeah. So I would actually ask your
Yeah.
oncologist to, yeah, I know that there are a lot of oncologists out there that do not like the Signatera test only because it can detect, it has the ability to detect cancer cells, but then if the cancer cells haven't formed like a tumor yet that's detectable via scan, then there's really nothing we can do about it
Right.
until it comes out on a scan or they can remove it or they can see it. So, a lot of people don't recommend it, but I just think it depends on the person that you are. If you like to know and you don't get super anxious if you were to get a positive result, I think it's helpful. For me, like I would rather know than not know.
I'm a huge fan of science, so I think I'm geared more in that direction. Like, I'd rather know as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
So I want to know
exactly.
what's
Yeah.
happening in here. I want to know why it's happening. I want to know how I can, help my body in any way I can. So no,
Yeah.
I think I would be okay. But you're right. There's a lot of people who couldn't handle the thought of having cancer and they're not knowing where. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
But
my oncologist did tell me that. He was like, it's not for everybody, but
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
I think I'm
I
gonna
think
like this new
everyone's
guy.
different. Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm so glad because yeah. But I would call Natera to ask them, but I'm almost positive they don't charge yet.
Okay. Well, have you yourself signed up to be part of any sort of nonprofits or support groups or anything like that yet?
I haven't honestly. This past YSC, when I was going through the booths, that was the very first time that I thought to myself, I am ready to give back. That was, I think, all of last year. I didn't realize it, and one of the nurses said this to me that right now she was like, "You're less than a year out from your treatments. Like, this is a time where you receive all the help, receive all of the, just everything, and then there's going to be a time where you're going to be ready to give back." And she was so right. I think all of last year, beginning of this year, I just wasn't ready to. I was at a point where I was still receiving help, or I was still, receiving the resources, and I think now I'm at that turning point of I think I'm ready to give back and find out how, in what ways can I give back. And I think right now I've just been realizing the importance of sharing my story. I think I have, because I've been more public in my social media, friends have been reaching out now saying, like their friend has just received a breast cancer diagnosis, or, my mother just received her diagnosis. And so recently, the past couple of months, I've actually been talking to just random strangers that have reached out, or friends of a friend. And I would say I talk to someone at least once a week, if not once every 2 weeks, because it's so unfortunate, but there are so many more young people that are getting diagnosed.
So many.
Um, and so I'm right now at least starting to give back in at least sharing my story and encouraging others to share their story and talking to people who are recently diagnosed, because I know that like in mid 2023, I didn't know anyone. I just felt so alone. I think I went on Facebook groups to read their stories so that I could feel less alone. And that helped. But now I'm trying to give back and sharing my story. And so that's why I'm so appreciative of this
Yeah.
platform that you have.
Yeah, and that's how mine started too. Just like that. We have a lot in common. When I got diagnosed, I'm an open book. Anybody who knows me knows that I'll talk about hard things and I'll go deep. I don't like shallow. It's a waste of time. So I want to talk about things that matter. And when I got diagnosed, I was like, all right, how am I going to handle this? Because I don't want to have a deep conversation every time I run into somebody at the store. Like if I'm at Publix and I'm bald and you're like, "Oh God, you're bald," and I don't want to cry over the produce.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
was
yeah,
like, "All right, Facebook, here's my story," and I was very open not too open. I mean, I did make a couple videos, but kind of like, so very similar to you. People just started sending people to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not an expert. I don't know. I just know my own story. And then I joined Facebook groups as well. My story, I did not love my team. I did not have a good experience. I live in a small town. I think that has a lot to do with it. But I came out angry and even more alone, and
Sure.
isolated, I guess. So I really had to dig deep on like, okay, what can I do? And there's nothing more powerful than our stories. Honestly, that's what came of it because I was like, when I shared my story, that allowed other people to be like, well, I can share my story and I can feel heard and seen and connected and I'm not alone. And then when someone else gets diagnosed, instead of finding a empty internet, they'll find you guys,
I love that.
and your hopeful
Yeah.
stories and like your joy and how fought back and all these beautiful, every single fired me. So this is, if nothing else, it's just selfish.
No, it's beautiful, and I totally 100% agree.
Yeah.
I think especially in the Asian American community, is cancer illness in general is very looked down upon.
Yes.
It's very hush hush, like you don't share your illness, to other people, and so even family members don't realize what you're going through. And I remember even my own mom, when I was sharing it on, social media, she asked me, why are you publicizing, your diagnosis, your cancer, everything like this should be dealt, within like your own home and, not in public. And it's very much that, I don't know, like that type of culture of not sharing, not publicizing your illness. And, going into my cancer center, the nurses there actually told me that I did a news segment for our local news about the growing rate of breast cancer diagnosis within Asian American women. And they're the highest demographics for receiving breast cancer rates or breast cancer
Really?
diagnosis recently. Yeah. The most recent study. And so, they were saying, they were like, oh, we saw you on the local news. And they all started sharing that they see so many Asian American women, but they all say that they feel so alone. They don't know anyone. And yet, the nurses see them all the time. Like there's just so many Asian American women that are coming in, but yet no, they're not sharing their story. So they don't know, um, and it was, yeah, one of the nurses actually said that, she had a patient in her room, and that patient, Asian American woman, actually noticed another Asian American lady that went by the doorway, and she recognized her. Um, and they went to the same church, and they didn't know
Going
that
through
they
it.
were going through this, and so I'm so appreciative of your platform because, I think the more we share our stories, I think it will help encourage other people to share and see the importance of
Yeah.
it.
And thank you for breaking the mold and being willing to share. Because for some, it is very personal and private. And honestly, I'll be 46 this May. When I was diagnosed, the first time I had a precancer, I was 32, and then the second time I was almost 41. Um, and so when I started going to support groups, there was a lot of older ladies, and I'm young at
Yeah.
heart.
Yeah. Same here.
And so
Same
I
here.
think I resonated more with the younger people. So I think part of the reason why is because the younger generation, my age and younger, we are more willing to share. We're more willing to talk about it and get it out there because we know how beneficial that is. But there's just some sort of stigma, and much more so in the Asian culture for sure, even African American culture, I would say. But there is definitely a stigma on don't talk about it, because you hear of your grandmother had breast cancer, but then what kind? What was her battle? What did she go through? My grandmother on my dad's side had breast cancer. It eventually took her life. I know no details. I know no
Mm,
information, and nobody does because she didn't talk about it. So it's like these talking about it, not only does it help the community, thrive and each other support groups and such, but it helps your generational, family lineage. Especially if you're a
Yeah.
grandmother and you have a daughter and grandchildren or whatever, it's something. I don't know. It's just something about don't talk about it that we've got to break that mold.
Yeah.
And so I'm proud of all of you who come on and do share because I do feel like we're doing that a little bit.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I also feel that, sorry, brain fog. I just lost my thought. Sorry.
It's like, where did
Yeah,
it go?
I know. I'm sure you
Yeah,
get this a
chemo
lot.
brain live
Yeah,
action.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Literally just escaped me. So yeah.
I felt it go. I saw it.
Yeah, it did. I see it and it hasn't come back, so whatever.
Story of my life. It's all the time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And gosh, I'm so glad that we connected and you do have so much joy. I mean, it just radiates out of you. So
Thank
you're
you so
winning. You're winning in
much.
that department.
Thank you. Honestly, I do think that I think this entire journey or experience is definitely life changing. And for a long time, I went through like the depression and the grief and like the mourning, and I still definitely have those moments and those days, and but they're no longer like weeks and months, of it. And because I have more room for joy, that's what I'm choosing to embrace, the growing room of my mason jar. That's like what now will fill my mason jar.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm choosing to focus on now.
Well, it's beautiful and it's
Thank
working.
you.
You were so joyful and so kind and so inspirational. I've
Aw,
thoroughly enjoyed hearing your story today.
thank you so much, Tara. I'm just really honored to be here.
Well, if any of you want to connect, if you're in the DC area or know someone who is, if you guys want to connect with Kim, you can certainly reach out here or reach out to me and I can connect you too. But anyway, thank you so much for watching another Powerful Warrior story today and stay tuned for more coming soon. Till next time, take care.